Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest this morning is a historian and primary researcher specializing in African and African American history and culture. He has a master's of art in history, African American studies from Morgan State University. His master's thesis, The Revolutionary Martin Luther King Jr., is being expanded into a 2-volume work entitled Martin Luther King, The Evolution of a Revolutionary. He's taught in the Department of History at Morgan State University in Baltimore and at San Francisco State University in the Department of Ethnic Studies. Also, he studied at Oxford University in England and has collaborated on a NASA-sponsored research project which examined the ancient climate and migration patterns in Africa. Currently, he is a tenured professor of history and Africana studies at Contra Costa College in San Pablo, California. He's also the director of Advancing the Research, where he created a 7-step primary research methodology home study course. His name is Professor MANU AMPIM. Welcome to Open Door, Professor.
Well, thank you, Brother Vince. I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And as I understand it, you are just back in America from being over on the other side of the world in Ethiopia and some other places. Talk to us about your travels.
Yeah, I've had a great summer. I was away for 2 months, so I led a group to Kemet or Egypt for an educational tour for a couple of weeks, and then after the tour, I led another educational group to Ethiopia, the land of ancient Kush. And after that 16-day tour, I had a film crew, a 4-man film crew, to join a group that I hired in Ethiopia to shoot for a documentary on Kushite Groups in Gambella. And Gambella is a area in southwest Ethiopia that's adjacent and next to South Sudan. So the groups in Gambella are groups that are linked to the southern areas. So it's what I call the other Ethiopia. So they link to, in terms of linguistically, speak a Kushite language, or they practice the cultural traditions from ancient Kush that have changed very little. And so they link to South Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. And it's amazing to me the cultural continuity over literally thousands of years. So the film crew was documenting the history of the groups in Gambella. And this is a part of a project that I'm working on the origins of ancient Kush and the continuation of the cultural legacy from ancient Kush. And so that's been part of my summer. I'm just getting back, and we have about 50 hours of footage with our 2-camera shoot, as well as we have some great drone images. And the way we gathered the information from Gambella is that I interviewed many chiefs, elders, and also heroes in these areas. And I should add that in Gambella, there's 5 main groups in the area that I call the other Ethiopia, because they look and are part of a different tradition than those in the northern area that we're familiar with in the U.S. But those 5 groups in Gambella are the Anahuac, the Majang, the Opal, the Nuer, and the Como. And so not enough work has been done on these groups. So like when Egyptologists and Nubiologists speak about the ancient groups in the Northeast Africa area, they're general. And a lot of their generalities are not accurate. They'll just call them Nilotic people or Southerners. But because of the work that I've done over the years in that area, rather than being general, I can be very specific. And when we look at the art from 4,000 years ago, the people and their dress, their cultural markings, it's very clear that which group it is that we are looking at. So that's part of the work. And I needed to make sure that this year we took the work in primary research to the next level and brought in the documentary crew. So I'm still on a absolute research high from my work over the last 2 months, but in particular the documentary work over the last couple weeks.
I'm curious, when you talk about differences and you mentioned dress and whatnot, can you talk about what some of those differences might be, other differences?
Yeah, so the groups are very specific and very particular. Like they cling to their traditional life ways so closely that they may trade with other groups, and sometimes they might have a common origin with some groups. But other than that, they don't care much about any other group. They're doing their own life ways. So the differences they're subtle, but they're very distinctive. So one would be the cultural markings, or what people know as scarification. I don't use the term scarification because that has a negative connotation and usually a negative meaning. But when they make the cultural markings on the body or the shoulder or the face, it's to link them to their particular ethnic group. And then there's subgroups and sub-clans. But the cultural markings I guess they're similar to what people here would do with tattoos. It's just that when people use tattoos here, it doesn't have any real meaning to a particular ethnic group. It's just cultural expression. Like an hour ago, I have a colleague at the college at Contra Costa. She sent me a guy who just got a tattoo made of not only his girlfriend's name, but two of the administrators on campus. So I don't understand that. So it's just, it doesn't have a lot of meaning, but for the Africans in Ethiopia and in the Gambella region, it's the cultural markings that distinguish one group from another. And they're very detailed in how that works, because the Nuer, they use the cultural markings or lines across their forehead. But as we cross the border from Ethiopia to South Sudan, you see not only the Nuer, but the Dinka and the Mandari. And they have culture markings that could be 4 lines across, 5, 6, sometimes 7. But it's not only the number of lines, but it's if the lines dip like a V shape, the Dinka do that because they represent and resemble the cow horns. And you can tell one group from another, not only from the number of lines, the shape of the lines, but also how far to the ear that the lines go. And so there's clans and subclans. So this is how it's easy to distinguish one group from another, as well as something that people would make a note of if they saw it. And that is, you have some of the blackest, darkest skin, beautiful skin Africans who are blue black, double black, gray black, amazing black, wild black. It was serious melanin, and yet their hair is reddish or yellow. And they changed their black hair to red or yellow by using cow urine to wash the hair. And if they do that over maybe about a 6-day period, the black hair turns to a yellow color or even kind of a reddish color. And so when we see in antiquity images with the yellow hair, that's not a artist's error or a mistake. The artist is capturing in antiquity exactly how the people from these southern areas look. And you see that today, particularly in the cattle camps. The young people in the cattle camps, you'll see the hair that's discolored in that way. So when we look at the cultural markings as well as the hair color, it's very clear which group is being depicted in antiquity. And so the Egyptologists who make up these terms like Nilotic, well, they all are from the Nile area, so that's not telling us much. But we can go deeper. That's when we're on the inside of the cultural lifeways to be able to distinguish one group from another. And what I decided to do was to not go in like the BBC or National Geographic and some of the companies. That what they'll do is they'll go in with a documentary crew, and this is the first time they're in the areas. So they'll stay a few days and have some amazing footage. The problem is that it is superficial and it is inaccurate because they don't have the deep knowledge of the culture. They're going in to just shoot some beautiful footage that looks great on TV or in their docudramas, but they don't really hit the mark in terms of accuracy. But what I've done is I've been in the southern Ethiopia area in the Omo Valley doing work for 8 years. And then last year, I went to these areas in Gambella, this very important region in southwest Ethiopia, to go to the areas, to interview chiefs, to interview elders, to interview and spend time with heroes, and to watch the cultural lifeways. So this year was to go back to those some of the same villages and new villages with the film crew. So like my colleague pointed out, this is much more thorough and detailed, and it will certainly be much more accurate than just going in and getting some good footage, but not necessarily good quality, accurate information. So we have both the footage now, as well as the information that we've carefully acquired, and with great work, because these are some of the most remote villages. And during the rainy season, which is during the summer, some of the places are more or less inaccessible. There's no way to get there because of the roads. So we've had those kind of challenges, but it's a beautiful challenge because it's part of the work that will help us to tell our story in a much more deeper manner than just saying ancient Kush. Now I'm in a position to really put together a powerful, accurate documentary to demonstrate this profound history.
So when you talk about groups of people who have taken great strides to preserve their cultural integrity, it's kind of a contrast to us here in America, because the pressure on us is to assimilate and to take on the culture of the dominant culture, so to speak, even though we have such a profound influence on it. Can you talk about the mindset of the people? Were you seeing that they were much more interested in being authentic to who they were than adopting Western kinds of lifestyles or affectations?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's actually kind of two different things happening. One is the modernization that's taking place around the world. It affects everybody. Even in the remote areas, there's still, even if it's indirect, there's some kind of influence, because the Ethiopian government, like other governments, they want to, quote, modernize or westernize. And even though Ethiopia has a strong tradition, the government has, they want to modernize and take advantage of the resources. And what that means is bringing in not just so-called development, but some Western ideas. So what's happening in remote areas like the Gambella area is you have people living in their same village areas and environments. So that part hasn't changed. But what I notice is that to some degree, there's not a lot of tourists who are in these southern areas of Ethiopia, but the people, they look for tourists. And when tourists come, I've seen in some areas, this is why all places are not the same, but I've seen people kind of put on maybe some traditional things, clothing, because this is what tourists want to photograph, and it's not something that they're wearing, and they do that in order to get money. And so in other words, the more pictures you take, the more money they want. So I've seen some adjustments and some changes in terms of how people are practicing their life ways in reference to tourists who are bringing modern ideas and modern money. So on the one hand, I've seen that change taking place, but then on the other, I've noticed that people are still staunchly connected to their traditional life ways. But there is this new development that's associated with modernism that is creeping in as well.
Mm. How did they receive you?
Well, I tell you, for me, I've been very fortunate. I don't think I could be more fortunate, really, because the people have embraced my work as if it's their own. There's a number of chiefs and elders that in different interviews, they pretty much said the same thing. So at the very end, when I'm asking them questions about their ideas and practices, then at the end, we just open it up to see if they had any questions for me. And what was pretty common is for the chiefs and elders to give genuine praise and admiration for my independent work, because it helps them to think more deeply, not only about the specific details of their rituals and ceremonies, but also to have a renewed respect for their tradition, because a number of them said that no one has ever asked those kind of specific probing details about specifics. Like, for example, one of the things that's amazing about the traditional life ways and in modern Africa is that they have so much respect for the tiger, the lion, excuse me, not the tiger, but they'll say tiger, but they really mean leopard.
Mm-hmm.
They mean leopard. Here in the West, we think the lion is the premier big cat, but it's not. It's the leopard. They have the utmost respect for the leopard in one culture after another. So I started some years ago asking questions, why the leopard? There's so many animals and cats, but why does this animal have such a special place? And the question came from the fact that if we look at classical Africa, we see leopard skin priests and chiefs and pharaohs performing rituals and ceremonies, but it's always the leopard. And so when I see that today, not only in the Ethiopian region, the Omo Valley, the Nile Valley, but around Africa, it's the leopard. So when I'm asking questions about why this particular animal and how do they wear the leopard skin, is the head up, is it down, how do they tie it? And it's amazing that the kind of details that the chiefs and the special elders give when I'm asking those kind of questions, because it's important to know the specific details group by group, and then be able to compare those practices today to classical Africa, because you can see the high priest, the chiefs, the kings or pharaohs from classical Africa performing very important ceremonies, and it's only those of the highest rank that can wear the leopard skin outfit. So when I'm asking, they can tell that this is very detailed information. But not only that, but after I'm asking them questions at the very end of these interviews, I actually show them images from 4,000 years ago that they've never seen before, and the reactions are always instructional, because in some cases the people know that that's them, that is their people in antiquity. They're looking at the jet black skin color, they're looking at the hair, they're looking at the jewelry, they look at the hide, that in the hide with the cow hide for a part of the clothes, and the leopard skin, and they can see all of this. They can see rings of gold being brought in trade. So it's amazing to really see the interaction with those photographs and images that they haven't seen before. But the embracing of the work has been very pleasing, because of the fact that they know that I'm not influenced by just a quick photo op or a couple questions so we can run off and publish, but it's really to look at a deep knowledge of their cultural lifeways, and then to show them images that link their practices today directly to the past. So it's been very well received in not only in Ethiopia, in Gambella, but even more in the Omo Valley area of Ethiopia, but also very well received in South Sudan, where I met with, in one instance, I met with 11 Dinka chiefs. And I remember that the Dinka chiefs, they stood up, and I didn't know what they were doing, but they sang two songs. And I asked the translator, what were they saying? He said, well, they sang these two songs in order to say that we accept your questions. And then we went on to have a beautiful interview. But after that, the kind of respect that the chiefs give is a clear indication of their approval, not only in South Sudan, but most recently in Gambella, where the chiefs were more than pleased, and even said in their own language, to the translators, that they, they're very excited about my project, and that they are willing to do whatever it takes to help me, to help them, because they understand that if I'm successful in documenting their traditional practices and ceremonies, it will help to create value for what they already have. And I remember one chief of the Anahuac group, he said that towards the end of the interview that he really is inspired because of the fact that he had to think about all these things about the Anahuac culture that no one's ever asked to that degree before, and that gives him a renewed respect for his own culture. But that was a common theme as we met with different chiefs, this summer as we documented the experience. So it's been very well received, and because of that, I'm very fortunate to not have any impediments to knowing and learning and having direct access to the most important people in those different cultures.
Mm. It's interesting when I think about the work that you're doing, and I reflect on my good friend Dr. Runoko Rashidi, who was taking a similar path in terms of documenting and letting us know about the presence of Africans around the world. I'm just wondering, the language issue. Do you feel like you lose anything because what they're sharing with you has to be translated in many cases?
Yes, there's always a loss. But one of the things that that I do with my colleagues to make sure that we can double and triple check is that I have two colleagues that speak English and the national language in Ethiopia of Amharic. So I have my two colleagues that are both translating, and we also have a third translator who speaks Amharic, but he also speaks the local language of the group, whether it's Nuer or Opo, Como. So we always have the three translators. Now, if the local person can speak English, then that's even better. They can speak directly to me, but even while that's taking place, where they're translating from the local language to English, and we bypass Amharic, but my colleagues are still there to make sure that if there's any kind of nuance that needs to be discussed, then we can, from English, from the local language, let's just say Anuak or Nuer, to English, if there's any small detail or nuance, then sometimes there's a discussion. Literally, there's a discussion in Amharic to flesh out what it is, because my colleagues know exactly what I'm asking, why I'm asking, and what I'm looking to get from each group and from each question, because it's generally the same group of questions from one group after another. And that's one of the values of working with colleagues that know what my mission is about, because as I'm doing the interviews and asking specific questions, before we wrap anything up, I ask them, is there anything else that needs to be added? Because they know that what I'm looking to get from the interviews. And sometimes they've even had to correct or supplement what the local translator is sharing, whether he's sharing in Amharic or sharing in English. When there are multiple translators, it kind of acts the same way that we don't want to interview, and we don't just interview one chief. We always interview a minimum of 3 elders, a chief and then 2 elders. Sometimes there's 4 of them, and it's better because people are able to add in and supplement ideas and information that may not have been mentioned by one person. So yes, there's definitely going to be something lost, but we do the best we can to prevent the loss of accurate information and translation by having several translators and 2 who work very closely with me, and they know exactly what it is that we're looking to get out. So but challenging them to go deeper. And I learned this a while back when I first started to do the interviews in the villages. We started off by talking to translators, and or village representatives. You recognize that was just broken information we were receiving. So now it's only chiefs, it's only elders, it's only heroes. But like if you ask, well, why do you use the leopard skin for the most important ceremonies? They'll typically say, well, we like the spots on the coat. And I know that that's just a surface answer. I say, yeah, but it has to be more than that, because the cheetah also has spots on his coat, but you don't have the same respect for the cheetah. So please tell us why the leopard, what's special about this animal. So I've learned, to go deeper and not just receive their first answer as if it's the deepest answer, because it's normally not. We have to really challenge just the general response. Even, talking about the birds, there's so many birds, but the bird that's preeminent in the entire region of East African region is the ostrich. So it's like, well, why the ostrich bird? And, oh, we like the feather. Well, it's got to be more than that, because you all use it in the most important ceremonies only and worn by only the most important people. So because I generally know how they're going to respond if they're not familiar with my work and the depth in which I'm looking to gain insight, they'll just give a general answer. And my colleague knows that, okay, thank you for that, but we need the real information. So he'll ask and ask again. And then he may even ask in Amharic to make sure that the translator understands that we need more, and that thank you for your English response. But now, to make sure you really understand what the professor said, let me ask you the same question in Amharic. And please, we want each of the elders to answer and not just the one, because sometimes they're very talkative, the group of elders, and they're kind of sharing ideas. And sometimes if one person answers, then the other ones, they don't respond. But I want all of them to respond, because usually they're able to listen to their colleague or listen to the chief and maybe add something that wasn't added. And sometimes there are gems they give us in the translations. But you're right. It's always it's tricky with translations and how it's translated, how words are spelled differently. This is why it's not a right or wrong, because sometimes some could be a K or a Q. It's not really right or wrong. It's just preference. And so, but in terms of what the meaning is very important to have able translators. And it's also important for me to also listen carefully, because a lot of times I can understand in general what's being said, because people have body language, they make gestures. And I remember one time, not this year, but it was 2 years ago when I was in South Sudan, describing a bird that I know that they were not talking about. They mentioned this, like, for example, the ostrich is an African bird. It's a big bird. It's 6-7 feet, tall. And the translator was talking about a small bird. And I kind of interrupted, I interrupted, said, that's a small bird. He's talking about a big bird. So I had to correct the translator, because I understood not necessarily every word, but I understood that the scenario that he was translating was not what was actually said to him. And so I learned to be very observant and to make sure I'm asking questions not only of the chiefs and elders and heroes, but to even follow up with the translator to make sure that he is doing his best to grab the particular details of what was said in his language, so that he's comprehensive and thorough. And sometimes we've had translators that they're just not able to translate on the level that's needed. And then that's when my colleagues come in, and then we kind of make a shift, and then they're asking the questions in Amharic to try to move from another angle. So from English, the translator is not able to do the best job. So we just make adjustments along the way. But this is very important for accuracy. And as we move forward with the documentary, one of the things is that we're going to have to also continue with the work, because we have the interview footage, but we have to make sure that the transcripts and the subtitles are correct. So we're going to have to go back to each group and make sure that the subtitles represent exactly what was said in those interviews.
You mentioned chiefs and elders and heroes. Is there a feminine presence in your conversations? Do you interview women as well as men?
Yes, that's a good question. There's mainly men that I interview, but I've learned that there has to be balance. I remember last year when I was among the Nuer, I was with all groups, I asked the same question, what is the name for hero, the special person? What's the name of hero in your group? And secondly, are there names or terms to define a female hero? I'm actually tallying this now, but most groups have male and female heroes. Here in the U.S., the Association of Black Psychologists, or ABPSI, they have popularized the term jegna. So there's many listeners of yours, I'm sure, have heard the term jegna. That's probably been used, I'm not exactly sure, maybe the last 7, no more than 10 years. And I discovered that the jegna, that's an Amharic word. So I'm out in the field and I continue to hear the term jegna. And I finally asked my colleague, I said, brother, jegna continues to be mentioned over and over again. Are you saying jegna? So no. This them. They're saying jegna. Jegna is a male hero. So this is what's now become known by some of the people in the cultural community here in the U.S. It's the Amharic word for hero, but not everybody's a jegna. That's for male. There's jegnit for females, and so but every group has their name, or not every group, but most of the indigenous groups have female heroes as well. So a jegna or a hero is somebody that defends, protects, and promotes the indigenous cultural traditions. So somebody that protects the culture is somebody that's a great warrior, someone who's brave, someone who goes against the enemy and is successful. But also a jegna is somebody that is a great farmer, somebody that is the best example of the culture as well, a best living example. So a jegna is one of those great heroes who protects against combatant groups, who protects or was able to protect the people from a dangerous animal like an elephant or a buffalo, a lion, or a leopard. So these are very dangerous animals. And so a jegna is a great fearless warrior who's able to protect against animals or other rival groups. And then with the female heroes, I remember when I was acting among the New Air last year, there's usually people around during the interviews because they're hearing details about their own culture that they haven't heard before. They may have seen the ceremonies and even participated in, but to have a chief or an elder explain the details about the entire ritual and ceremony, usually with this kind of detailed discussion, there's always people, there's children, there's young people around, there's other elders who are sitting nearby, there's women who come. And among the New Air, when I was asking about women, it was funny because no one had been asking those kind of questions before. And I kept asking from different angles about female heroes. And so the women had their own boisterous reaction to it in approving this line of questioning.
They want their stories to be told too.
Absolutely. And then speaking of their stories being told, so then at the very end of the interviews, when it came time for pictures, the women were right there. So I'm in the picture with the male leaders, but also with the women who also wanted to be photographed as well, which is a great moment because generally people think male only, but there's significant female leadership and heroes. And this year I was able to interview some of the women who are these cultural heroes. And it was good to interview them because I wanted to know, because I got the general information. Well, how did they become a hero? And so a lot of times the women, they don't become a female hero by warfare. Usually that's the men or protecting against a wild animal. But for the women, it's the keeping of the culture, that they're very good in agriculture. They're great at cooking. They're great at home life and homemaking. They're great at greeting guests. They're great at cooking and making sure that these are healthy meals. And so the female heroes are examples for everybody that's given the utmost respect. So I was able to ask the women, what's your experience? How did you feel becoming such a notable person in your village, in your community, among your people? To ask, so how was the ceremony? What do you remember? How do you feel now? And the women said they feel great because there's respect. There's respect throughout not only the local compound, but the village that they live in and beyond. That there's high level respect for them, and but they cannot reach this level of respect until they're married. So they put great emphasis on family as the core unit that builds the community and the ethnic group. So this is like new and unique work because as I mentioned, people are familiar with the term jegna, but to go deeper, group by group, to actually talk to and learn about how does a person receive hero status, and how do they feel now as local heroes, local legends. And so I was able to interview the women and the men regarding that. But there's a high level of respect for the women, which is very different than what we're dealing with now, because in the modern era, there's so much modernism and is transmitted now mainly through Instagram and TikTok. It's amazing the kind of values and crazy ideas that's being promoted. And this is why there's so many people single and in relationships that are not healthy, because these are not relationships built for marriage and have a stable community. It's just a hookup culture, and that's very common. And people will go online, and there's no shame. Literally, there's absolutely no shame of what people are promoting online, particularly through TikTok. So this is now spreading dangerous, outrageous ideas and that people follow from strangers that they've never met and never will meet. But they think that a lot of the social media influencers or just random videos that this is real life is not real. People can give highlights and distort the entire experience. And that's what happens among people in their 20s now, 30s, and even have 40-something-year-olds following this craziness. So there's a rapid change that's taking place in the modern era regarding relationships, regarding family, regarding children. So when I'm in the field, what a contrast, what a great contrast where this is nothing but stability. And if somebody disrespects the culture, then they're ousted from that culture in these traditional areas. These people don't play. They don't play. If somebody wants to do their own thing and to violate tradition and violate ethics and morality and good character, there's a price to pay in these rural traditional communities. And that's why they stay stable over a long period of time, because of the fact that they respect tradition. But I've also learned, talking to them, that they don't mind in Ethiopia and also in South Sudan in particular, they don't mind changing some of the cultural life ways because they think that it's in their best interest. Like some of the cultural markings, well, not some, but the cultural markings in general. They're outlawed in South Sudan, but yet it still continues. And in Ethiopia, it's fading away, because it's not something that the Ethiopian government respects. They think it's too tribal and it's not part of the modern era. They want people to speak the national language of Amharic. They want people to stop with the culture, with the removing of the lower teeth as a part of a traditional ritual. They want them to stop with the cultural markings and to stop a lot of things. And why? Because they want to modernize the country. Mm-hmm. And so people can say, yeah, we cannot maybe do the cultural markings, but we want to continue with our other traditions. So this is part of the battle to maintain their traditional ways in the modern era. And it's not easy because there's outsiders that want them to change, not in their best interest, but it's interesting. They all use this term bad culture. What do you mean bad culture? So this is something that's in the mind of the modern people in Ethiopia, for example, is that they're using this term bad culture. Bad culture is indigenous practices that they think is outdated or un-Western or uncivilized. So what do you mean bad culture? You mean practices that you have a problem with? How is that bad? How can that be? How's something bad culture? There's things that you all do that are destructive, that are completely negative, but you don't see it that way. So you want to cast your views on somebody else, and yet your practices are indefensible. But you don't think about it because you're looking at it from an outside Western point of view. And when these people say modern, they automatically mean not just current, they mean better. And this is part of the the craziness. So I always question. I heard that a number of times in the field about bad culture. What do you mean bad culture? And they don't normally have a clear definition of what they're saying. So this is a term that's being thrown around in order to dismiss practices of the indigenous groups that the modern government doesn't like.
Mm. You know, as you speak about what's going on over there with respect to culture, I was just thinking about perhaps some of the differences between there and here. Here in America, you know, it's like 3 out of 10 might be married. Over there, are you seeing a lot more integrity in terms of the institution of marriage amongst those people?
Yes, the institution of marriage is a fundamental requirement, really, to move to continue with the life ways of the culture. So yes, in the rural indigenous areas, marriage is as prominent and central as it's ever been. That hasn't changed, but in the urban areas, very different. So the modernism that's taking place in the world has negatively affected relationships and marriage. So there's a lot of as I travel around the country, there's a lot of young men and women who are not married, and there's no real prospects of marriage because now, as I tell my colleague, I say, man, things have changed a lot. So, you know, there's guys that think that it's easy to just find a wife. And I said, hey, look, let me tell you something. A lot of the women, when they've gone to school and they have a degree, that degree is linked in their mind to a career. So the career is more important than marriage and family. And I've seen that. So there's women that and guys that have not been married. They know that's kind of a problem where you're in your late 20s, you're in your 30s, never been married. And there's also a number of women that are single mothers in Ethiopia and haven't been married. Or in some cases, they've been married and they've been divorced for a while, but now they have a child or more than one child and no husband. So things are changing more in the urban areas like Addis Ababa, you know, the capital city and places like that. That's where it's changing. But in the rural areas, there's not much change regarding marriage. So they still are very stable. And when you're in the village, what you see and hear is laughter. Not much stress. You don't see it. You don't see it. You don't feel it. Even if they have to, because there might be a border conflict, even if guys might have some weapons, they're as relaxed as anybody. You know, you don't feel any of the stress there. And but in the urban areas, though, that's where the change is being made. So we'll see, like you say, 3 out of 10 here. That number is becoming much higher in Addis Ababa because there's so many people that are there, and there's a lot of pressure to have a job, have a career, and be able to make enough money to be able to sustain themselves. And so a lot of women are not married, and their career is a top priority, and not marriage as it has been in traditional in previous generations.
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, Cleveland's Urban Alternative. I'm having a conversation with Professor MANU AMPIM. He is an historian and primary researcher specializing in African and African American history and culture. Professor, you spent considerable time there in Ethiopia. You talked about Gambella, but you also spent some time in Kemet, known by most as Egypt. Can you talk about the contrast between what you were gathering in Ethiopia versus Egypt?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So, you know, Egypt was where I actually started to do, it's not the first place I visited in Africa, but it's the first place that I really began to do primary research back in 1990. So this year has been a continuation of leading educational tours, but also doing field work in Egypt. There's definitely a big difference because in Egypt, the official, we call it Kemet by the old name, the land of the black land or the land of black people. So we call it Kemet. But the current name today, the official name is the Arab Republic of Egypt. And that's very important to emphasize because it then explains how the monuments and how the tourist experience is presented. Everywhere you go, there's always something somewhere that will mislead the visitor. So whether it's a souvenir shop, where no matter where you go, there's always the Nefertiti forgery somewhere front and center for you to see, the so-called Berlin bust. That's not an ancient African artifact at all. It was actually made by Germans around 1912. It's one of the great forgeries in the world. And so that image is promoted everywhere, all over the country. So as I go to the different locations in Kemet, whether it's pyramids, temples, tombs, ancient residential sites, and museums, I'm aware of the presentation. So so that's really important. So I've been able to go to places and document exactly how the layout of the artifacts are. So one of the big things now is that after the tour group left, I stayed an extra day before going to Ethiopia to the Grand Egyptian Museum, or the GEM. And this has been the most talked about museum in the world of antiquity, or artifacts from antiquity. And it's been this well-anticipated grand opening. So they haven't had a grand opening. It's been a soft opening where there's 10 galleries that are open, but there's 12 galleries altogether. And the 11th and 12th is the gallery of the big solar boat, 140-foot long solar boat that that room hasn't been revealed, or the 12th one, which is the treasures of King Tutankhamun. So people have gone, but they haven't seen everything. But I went, and one of the things that was very notable, and I've posted some of this on Facebook and my YouTube channel as well. I'm going to post a little bit more, and that is to really highlight that the agenda of the museum organizers and curators is not just to present so-called ancient Egypt, but is to present a propaganda story. So you have in the lobby, there's a huge statue of the greatest builder of them all, which is Ramses the Great, or Ramses II, about 1200, almost 1300 before the Common Era. So he's a great builder. But in that same Grand Egyptian Museum lobby, they have two statues of some Roman images. And these images are 1,500 years apart. Nothing in common at all. There's no connection other than the fact that they're promoting some modern Roman images from Europe that have nothing to do with classical Africa or Kemet. And that's part of the theme throughout. You have these statues in the lobby, and then before going to the actual galleries, there's stairs at the Grand Egyptian Museum. And there's a complete violation of basic historical layout, which is you have to follow a timeline or chronology to put things in a time sequence so that the reader, or in this case, the viewer or visitor, has an idea of how the society, how the civilization developed. It's very common and required that you start with the oldest artifacts, the oldest era, and then chronologically in a sequence you show the most ancient time period up to the current. They don't do that. At the Grand Egyptian Museum, they violate all professional standards and just throw together images that are hundreds, in some cases thousands of years apart, with no rhyme or reason to it. And that allowed them, with this presentation chaos, to then throw in a Roman image of a Roman emperor, and because it's all jumbled together. So you got a Roman emperor, his name is Caracalla, and he is next to images that are thousands of years before, thousands of years earlier, and there's no connection whatsoever, other than the Romans invaded Kemet and start imitating, even though they took over politically, the Romans did, after Julius Caesar and others, but they start, even though they took over politically, they were culturally clearly inferior because they took on the cultural characteristics and practices of the Africans that they later conquered, that they had conquered. That's very rare because usually imperialists, they impose their language, they impose their culture. In this case, the Romans absolutely adopted the culture. And other than that, there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. So when the Romans come in the first century before the Common Era, Kemet is already gone. the African civilization of Kemet had already become a great power, a great civilization, and it was built and gone by the times the Greeks and Romans came. So there's only 30 dynasties or 30 family of rulers. The 30th dynasty is finished. And after the 30th dynasty is finished, then a couple hundred years after that, the Romans come around. So how in the world could a Roman image make any sense other than a modern propaganda ploy to throw Roman and European images among African artifacts that go back to the 12th dynasty, the 18th dynasty, 19th dynasty, thousands of years ago, or 1,000 years before the Romans, and then throw Roman image in there because it's not in a sequential order anyway. And that's the theme of the Grand Egyptian Museum. It's shameful. It doesn't meet professional standards. And it's amazing because of all of the hoopla about this grand opening and this big collection. And one last thing, these people are so concerned about promoting this around the world, the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is a huge building. It's much larger than even the Cairo Museum in downtown Cairo. This just dwarfs it. And so it's all this great anticipation. They were going to actually have the official grand opening on July the 3rd, but because Israel started to kill more people in Palestine and with another level of invasion, so the Egyptian government decided that even though that does not directly influence Egypt at all, there's no refugees coming through the border, or there's no direct implications from the war. No one's at risk or anything like that. But they decided to postpone the grand opening because they don't want the Grand Egyptian Museum's grand opening to compete with the headlines from what's happening in Palestine with Israel's new offensive. So this is how concerned they've been about marketing this great museum. But then when I was in there, it's like amazing. They would spend millions upon millions of dollars on this project, and then you go inside and it's completely disappointing. There's no way to justify throwing in these images other than that somebody has an agenda. I say that if they don't know better than that, they all should be fired, but I think they know exactly what they're doing. And one last thing about the Grand Egyptian Museum, because people have been asking me for years, is it open now? Hey, I heard it's open. Nope, it's not open. They open up shops. You can go in, you can shop. They open up some of the conference rooms. You can have a conference, but the galleries were closed. And now that they're open, I decided that I needed to go in order to report to people who've been asking me for the last couple of years about whether or not it's open. And then you go in there and the whole design is really chaotic. So just lastly on this point is that usually professional layout, you just do it chronologically in a time sequence. So it'll be Dynasty 1, Dynasty 2, Dynasty 3. It follows a sequence so people can follow. However, that's not how they have it at the gym. They have a zigzag pattern. So you have to study the layout in order to go from the first to the second gallery, which is hard to do because it's a zigzag pattern. So I've seen people go to gallery 1, gallery 4, gallery 7, gallery 10 because it's zigzag and it's hard to figure out. So that's important to share with people so that they don't think that they're missing out when they had to add another day just to see a museum that's going to charge you $25 for the same old presentation that couldn't work in the past, where they're misleading the public by throwing in European images and downplaying some of the most important eras and important rulers in the history of classical Kemet. They don't get any attention in the museum, and they're put or presented in a way that it's not interesting. Yeah. So I've seen people go directly to the Roman and Greek area and spend time there rather than areas where you have some of the greatest builders in the history of the world.
That's
like
amazing.
Ninju Hotel.
That's amazing. We got to wrap things up real quickly, but I want to thank you for joining me today and let everyone know that you can go to advancingtheresearch.org, advancingtheresearch.org, and you can get more information about Professor Manu and all of the things that he is doing. Unfortunately, he may not go to Africa next year, but he's got plenty of research to share with you. So join us once again right here on Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Thanks for joining me today, brother.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Peace, everyone.